Alright, in this video we're going to finish up with the sponge technique and some dry brush, and then we're going to do the splatter technique. So let's go ahead and start with the sponge technique. You'll notice that your sponges are irregular because they're natural sponges that were, liberated from the ocean. So when we're getting ready to use the sponge technique, and I'm going to use it to create the fluffy top of the tree, you need to make sure that it's dry all around, and mine is. I'm going to take my little sponge and dip it in the water and then kind of wring it out. Now I didn't put the whole thing in the water because that'll make a mess, but just a little bit, and then I wrung it out. I have my paint all ready to go over here, and it's a fairly bright concentration of green. So I'm going to dip my sponge in the green like that, and then use the sponge to apply a green pad, a little bushy, like kind of green around there. Now I'm going to let it dry. I would probably do several layers of this green to create a tree type texture, but for right now just one, because if I put more on it, it will just blob out. Next we have our little red flower. We're going to be painting that in with some fine detail. So I'm getting my brush wet, and I'm using the little brush for this one, and I'm going to put my little brush into the red and move it over just like we have done before. Let me make this bigger so you can see it. Move this over just like we did before and get it a little bit wetter so that it'll be a light pink. Wipe your small brush on the side so that it will get pointy, and I'm just going to carefully paint this in. Again, this works because the grass is dry around the outside. Okay, and if it starts to puddle, again, you know that you can dry off your brush just a little bit and then absorb the puddle of paint with your dry brush. Okay, next, while we wait for this to dry, we're going to work on the splatter technique. The splatter technique is something you want to make sure that you're kind of controlled with, or it gets everywhere. And let's pull this back so that I can do it. So you need to have some kind of soupy paint and 2 paint brushes to do splatter. When you get ready to do splatter, you get your paintbrush wet first, and it doesn't matter if you use the big one or the little one. I'm using the little one because I have a little splatter area. And I'm going to start with the blue, just because I want to. You can choose whatever color you already have mixed up. And so I've got my brush in the blue. You hold the other brush in your non-dominant hand, and then you tap the brush with the paint with your dominant hand, and that creates a really cool splatter technique. You want to try another color, go ahead and just rinse off your brush. I'm going to go ahead and do the red because I'm not using it for anything else, so I thought I would. Just like that. Now you can see that it kind of gets everywhere, and for your practice it doesn't matter. For a final, if you wanted to splatter on something, I would encourage you to cover up the other areas so that they don't get splatter on them. Next, we're going to go ahead and try some dry brush in the grass so that you can see how to make kind of a flicky dry brush grass texture. So I have gotten my brush wet, right? I get it wet, and then I use my paper towel and my thumb to wipe it off so that it's dry. And then I'm going to spread out the bristles with my thumb so that it fans out like this. Then I will dip just the ends in the green paint. Okay, and then I'm going to use a flicking motion like this to create that little grass texture. So I'm going to start at the top and just kind of flick up. So it's very much like a little stipple situation. And if you look at it, you can see how it's starting to create this little grass texture. And then just making sure that it stays dry and the little bristles are all flared out. And go like this. Now, I wouldn't do just green on green if I wanted it to be realistic. I would go ahead and do a little bit of blue too, or like a blue-green. Got a little too much on my brush there. Make sure it's splayed out like this. You just spread it out and then dip your paintbrush in. And then we're going to do some flicking again. Oop, I didn't get enough on there. I'll have to try that again. So we're going to go like that, and flick, 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 flick. Just like that all around. And then the green and the blue will mesh together and you'll end up having kind of a cool little grass look. Okay, and that's just how you get that texture. The top of my tree is dry, so I'd like to do another layer of green stipple. So I've still got a wet sponge, and I'm going to go in here and get the sponge and do another layer so that it gets deeper. Just like that, and that's looking pretty complete for me. Let's go ahead and go up. You can see where I, because I didn't let this dry, I kind of smeared it up a little bit. But when your watercolor techniques sheet is finished, it should look like this, and you can put it on the drying rack.